queen's crown awaits, as does my king. The future's ours, let the heavens sing. No fear for lore of priests gone past. In love and rule, our legacy will last.
When Zarin brought me the notebook, I was confused. The cover art suggested it was more than 50 years out of date. This was delivered to Hath, Zarin told me. It is addressed to you. The inside cover had pre-printed places where the owner could enter identifying information, name, date, subject, and teacher. Rebecca Strom, September 15th, Algebra 1, Mrs. Colby, were identified. Only about half of the notebook was used, typical 9th grade algebra. The final page in the notebook had a few sentences written in the same childlike script. I discovered today that Emily is not my sister. After Mum was gone, Dad confessed what happened. My real sister was born dead, so Dad took a baby from the hospital. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call the cops. I finally decided to sneak onto the Coleman ranch. I wrote her real name on her arm, wrapped her in a blanket, and left her in the stable. At the time, I was sure that she would be returned to her family. Dad never asked about her. Mrs. Colby told us that writing down our feelings allows us to focus on learning. I felt better immediately. I felt a thrill of recognition as I closed the notebook and stared off into space. This was one of the missing clues related to Mother's abduction as an infant. I was glad that the mystery had been solved a few years back, but this childish confession seemed to answer just a few of the remaining questions that lingered. Miracle Zakarian, Enscrito.
A cascade of memories washed over Alexandros, like the night Apollyon scolded Estraeon's wife Marta, while Ulysses lay wounded, missing a foot. They dined on vegetable stew without the usual meat, Estraeon's absence having disrupted the slaughter of the spotted four-horned lamb. Apollyon, disgusted to have no meat, berated Marta, but she was so caught up in the moment and her husband's heroic act that she barely registered Apollyon's harsh words. Other incidents like this crowded his thoughts. The day Apollyon dared him to race along Ankamoon's rocky shores. Apollyon claimed victory when Alexandros, wary of the uneven ground, pulled his horse to a stop, valuing its safety over triumph. Riding back, Alexandros noticed Apollyon's horse limping badly. By the time they reached Mount Zacharias, the horse couldn't bear weight on its leg. Alexandros remembered Apollyon's cold decision to have the animal put down, insisting on doing it himself. The memory of Cathea crystallized Alexandros's resolve. During his acolyte year, he stumbled upon her sobbing in the sacred grove. At the time, he couldn't comprehend the scene before him, but years and divine clarity unveiled what his innocence had obscured. Her appearance was disheveled and distraught, her skirts dirty, her lips swollen. When he offered comfort, she accepted his embrace, clinging to him as if time stood still. After releasing him, she placed a hand over her abdomen and said,
"You have helped me this day, Alexandros Martavius."
She then took both of his hands, reminiscent of the tales of past keepers, and gazed into his eyes.
Your purity of spirit, Alexandros, is beyond price. Use it wisely.
Later, Alexandros learned that she left Estolia for good, driven away by Apollyon. Years later, he learned that she claimed the authority to speak and act on behalf of Deity. Memories swirled in his mind as Apollyon's painful grip on his arm hardened Alexandros' resolve to fulfill Deity's command. He understood the weight of this moment. One day, he would look back, astonished by the peace that would flow through his body, self, and soul. For now, he felt numb to everything but his duty. He stepped back and looked at Patriciala. She saw his stepping away from Apollyon as cowardice, saw his brother as the winner of the confrontation. She did not look repentant, Instead, she had a look of avarice on her face. She coveted the position of queen, and she would lie to obtain it. Neither were worthy of the positions that they had within their grasp. If only Apollyon had been willing to wait to consummate his relationship with Patriciala. To be king was a position with few qualifications, and yet he could not do it. He could not wait to claim Patriciala until his birthday, and he could not accept just her and abdicate the throne to be with her, though Alexandros was certain that his brother loved her. They would throw it all away for a combination of lust and avarice. He gestured to the ceremonial pillows and said, his voice heavy with defeat,
"Kneel."
He could feel the power instilled by Deity in his soul. Apollyon looked at him with a smirk of victory and superiority. He lifted his hands to his head, pulling off the crown of heir apparent before handing it to one of the acolytes. He helped Patriciala kneel on one of the pillows before removing the tiara reserved for the Caeli of heir apparent and handing it to another acolyte. Smoothly, he knelt next to Patriciala, and they both bowed their heads. Ulysses lurched upright and approached where the two were kneeling. With crutches under both arms, he could use both hands to take part in the blessing. He moved with decisiveness to place his hands upon Apollyon's head. Alexandros met Ulysses' eyes, and they had a moment of silent yet profound communication. Ulysses nodded, and his eyes dropped to the sash crossing Alexandros' chest over his heart. Alexandros moved around behind Apollyon, reaching up to feel the dagger within its frayed sheath. Bowing his head, he said formally,
"I, Alexandros Martavius, direct descendant of Zacharian and second son of the king of Estolia, as last resort have an obligation to Zacharias, to Estoliana, and to all the citizens of Estolia to fulfill my destiny and the role that you bestowed upon me. Apollyon Demetrius, descendant of Zacharian, heir apparent to the throne of Estolia, the promises made by Zacharias unto Deity are the only protection we are given to keep us apart from, and blessed more than the rest of humanity. Only by keeping those promises do the people of Estolia reap the benefits and receive the multitude of promises made by Deity. It is my duty to make certain that those promises are kept, to stand as safeguard should illness or iniquity render the heir apparent incapable of holding his ancestral position as sovereign of Estolia, a duty you yourself bestowed upon me less than 2 weeks ago. Apollyon, as one who has spurned the substance and the spirit of the requirements handed down to you as the heir apparent, and upon your refusal to abdicate, in the name of Deity, I proclaim you unworthy as sovereign."
Tears were tracking down his cheeks as he swiftly drew the blade of the dagger across his brother's throat, praying to Deity that his motion would be true. He felt as if he was two separate men, himself and his brother also. He knew with the clarity of Deity that his brother did not realize what happened. The blade was sharp, his motion true, and Deity had the compassion to numb Apollyon to the truth. Swiftly, to make the pain as brief as possible, he moved behind Patriciala, and with the same motion he drew the blade across her throat. When he finished, he realized only a few heartbeats separated his declaration of Apollyon's unworthiness and the final act against the woman who would have been queen. Apollyon's eyes opened, and his hand went to his throat, unable to stem the flow of blood. He looked at Patriciala and saw the truth of what had happened. His eyes met Alexandros's eyes, and he mouthed the word "brother" before pulling Patriciala into his arms. They crumpled to the surface of the dais. Alexandros and Ulysses both stood on either side of the two, shoulders squared, feet awash in the blood that still pumped from Apollyon and Patriciala's throats and flowed down the steps. The outer doors to the ceremony room swept open. Alexandros felt as cold as the depths of winter. He watched as his father and his uncle entered the room, stopped, and looked at the carnage. At Ulysses on his crutches, Alexandros holding the dagger, both covered in blood, at the 24 acolytes and half a dozen elders surrounding them. Alexandros lifted his chin slightly. He did that which his uncle, his father, and his brother disdained. He upheld the promise of Zacharias. After a moment he looked away from the newcomers and back down to the pitiful bodies.
"As last resort, I have exercised my sacred authority to ensure that the wishes of Deity and the promise of Zacharias are always upheld."
He felt his entire body suffused with warmth as Deity assured him of how right his action had been. Peritasis's chin jutted, and he squared his shoulders before stepping up onto the dais within the spreading pool of blood.
As keeper, my duty is clear.
He paused and looked down at the two bodies for a long time before switching his attention to Alexandros.
So long as you keep the promise of Zacharias, you, Alexandros Martavius, descendant of Zacharian, are now the heir apparent.
He saw one of the acolytes holding the crown and held his hand out. Alexandros bowed his head to allow his uncle to place the crown upon it. His uncle unpinned the sash of the office of last resort from his shoulder and hip.
Ulysses Anatoli, descendant of Zacharian, will you serve as your cousin's last resort from this day forth until he has fulfilled the promise of Zacharias?
Ulysses' voice was powerful, and there was not a man within the ceremony room who did not believe that he was fulfilling his true destiny.
I accept the office of last resort. I pledge my body, self and soul to upholding the promise of Zacharias, and I promise to always place the needs of Estolia above my own.
Peritasis looked deeply moved by what his son said.
Upon sanctification of your marriage, you will take over from me as the keeper. It is to be hoped, my son, that you will keep it with greater purity than I have done.
Alexandros felt once again that profound wash of peace he knew came from Deity. While wearing the sash of office of last resort, he had served Deity and Estolia. He had fulfilled his duty. Had Apollyon kept the promise of Zacharias, then Alexandros would have served as his first consul, and once married as keeper of the soul of Estolia. But he felt far greater peace and purpose in the position of heir apparent than he had ever felt as last resort and future keeper. When he married and his Kaylee sealed their union with a son, he would become king of Estolia and serve her well. He would moreover work with Ulysses to make sure that this never happened again. He did not wish for any of his descendants to have to make the same decision he made on this day.
Connected hearts defy the old. In our embrace a story bold will reign as